And I might ask the question, why does it take until Abdul-Majid for somebody to see that new organizational forms are needed and that you cannot compete in the modern global economy with simple organizational forms? Why don't they see it? One, the basic reason is that Europe, until quite late, is an economic backwater. The basic, more trade is done with India and China and with sub-Saharan Africa and so on than with the West until quite late. So the divergence I've talked about actually goes back 1,000 years. But for most of that part, the Middle East is doing quite well. Europe is developing these modern organizational forms, but it is not translating into much greater wealth and much greater power. And so they don't really see the Ottoman economic system as a failed system. In fact, foreign visitors, European visitors who come to Istanbul, even in the 17th century, they're quite impressed they go to Kapalı Çarşı and they're quite impressed with the variety of goods and the dynamism, and Istanbul is still one of the major commercial centers of the world. They're still very good. They don't see, they see the differences are emerging, that these economies are beginning to look different. They see that the Western traders start settling in ever larger numbers in the Ottoman Empire, that they are actually doing business in a different way, but they don't really see this as a form of great superiority. They see it as a difference. Now, when in the 19th century, trade with Europe starts becoming much, much more important than trade with India and with China and other parts of the world, that is when they start realizing that something has to be done. It takes a couple of generations for them to really figure out exactly what needs to be done. The number of reforms that have to take place are immense. Abdul-Majid himself doesn't realize that people can't just form companies like Şirket-i Hayriye and start have 1,500 shareholders and so on if you don't have a stock market. And not every company can be formed under Abdul-Majid's patronage. Şirket-i Hayriye survived because Abdul-Majid protected it. Okay? And it just takes a while for them to realize it. Once they realize it, the reforms follow. And in fact, you don't get resistance from the clerics. You don't get opposition to establishing stock markets. This doesn't become isn't seen as a form of overthrowing Islam or an anti-Islamic reform. It's not seen that way. Accounting conventions are changed, and this is not seen as problematic. Modern organizational forms are, the joint stock company is established. It's not seen as a big problem. When the law of corporations is passed, it's not seen as a problem. And even today, if you look at the Islamists around the world and movements, and look at the most extreme ones, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, they take issue with lots and lots of things. You know, the way treatment of women and family matters and education, all of these are issues that they care about. They don't care about the corporation, even though, you do have, even in modern Afghanistan, we do have a corporation. These are not things that they oppose. So religion per se was not a source of opposition. Certain laws that were part of Islamic law, that are part of what we call in Turkish the Shariat, these were major problems. And in combination, they prevented the region from generating modern organizational forms from within.
Yeah, Timur, thanks for this marvelous exposition. Actually, as a historian, I had some questions in mind. For example, I'm a little bit surprised that you did not refer to any productive activity, when you talked about the first company Şirket-i Hayriye. Yeah. But before that, for example, in Bursa, there used to be quite a number of factories that used steam power, well back in the 1840s. I mean, I feel that we need to know more about the history of industrialization in the Ottoman context. I mean, the first big company as such is the textile factory established by Selim III in the Beykoz, and well, I mean, it's a state operation, but so were many of the Eastern European, Russian, and Habsburg, the activities. And well, I just feel that we need to conduct some more research into the history of individual, companies, firms, and whatnot.
You certainly had, even well before the textile factories in Bursa, you had large-scale production facilities. You had armament factories. You had the big tersanes, the shipbuilding factories. These were all state-supported and state-organized. So you certainly had a lot of ingenuity there, and the state did undergo reorganization, and it found ways of producing on a large scale. I have talked about the private sector, and there's certain things that the state cannot do very well. So that's one point. The second point is some of these factories, I don't know which factory in Bursa you're referring to, but most of these factories that until Şirket-i Hayriye were founded were actually founded by local minorities. Largely, the large amount, if not all of the capital, came from local minorities. They had connections with foreigners, and they were using foreign institutional forms. And this is also one of the things that Abdülmecit and people around him, like Ahmet Cevdet Pasha, they notice that the Muslims of the empire are handicapped because they're unable to use these organizational forms, that the minorities are able to do so. So this is one of the reasons they established this as a prototype and tried to spread the news that here's a new type of organization. So it's not that the state cannot do it. Şirket-i Hayriye is a good example. The state can do it, but you want the prosperity of Western Europe depended not just on state factories, but also private enterprise. And this is something that lags.
Thanks for the clarification, because certainly when we talk about such concepts as the underdevelopment or development, they are very loaded as well. And it's good that you clarify your position. You talk about private sector. Otherwise, there are several ways to the development. And once upon a time, say 20 years ago, in Turkey, people when talked about capitalism and socialism and whatnot, each of them was an independent path to development. So it's probably today's China's path. It's not exactly Western path, but they are developing, and one way or other.
This is also, again, something that I'm very sensitive in the work that I do, and also this is turning into a book that is just about finished. And I'm very careful to distinguish between the Western path of development and the path to, and ultimately the outcome, which is being able to exploit modern technologies. Okay? And this is something that people all around the world want to do. They want to produce, they want to engage in mass production because it produces, you're able to increase production by orders of magnitude, and that increases consumption. This is something that the desire to do this is universal. You can do it in various ways, so this is why I have spent a lot of time looking for alternative paths, and I don't have a full explanation until I can tell you why alternative paths were also blocked. And why did I pick the Waqf as an example to give to you? Because this is the most important institution of the non-state sector in the Ottoman Empire. They control, in Turkey at least, according to Yedildiz's data, at least a quarter of all real estate, probably up to half. So this could have been a starting point. So that would have been a different path to development.
So there is another presentation at 4:30, so why don't we take one last question and we can continue outside.
Timur, thank you very much for your very enlightening presentation. Just I would like to remind about something. We are asking the question, why the Ottoman Empire, or why the Muslims remained underdeveloped. But I mean, we should also think that Ottoman Empire was not a nation state. It was not a purely Islamic empire. It was a multinational, multi-religious empire, and there was a kind of a division of labor. I mean, the Muslims were either they were bureaucrats, they were soldiers, they were farmers, but to some extent they were also merchants. But if we look at the non-Muslims, the Armenians or Greeks or the Jews, especially in the 16th century, I mean, they were quite engaged in commerce, and I think in the 17th and 18th century there was a rise of Armenian and Greek bourgeoisie, and they could quite compete with their Western counterparts. So what we see is that actually they were, until the rise of nationalist movements and until the separation of the Greeks and other Balkan nationalities, I mean, these non-Muslim groups, they were an integral part of the Ottoman Empire. So actually they were functioning as a bourgeoisie of the empire. So therefore for the Muslims, there was not a question in terms of why are we stagnant and so forth. Actually, the non-Muslims and Muslims were an integral part of the same system.
This is certainly a very good point, and in the book this presentation is a part of, I go into something that I did not spend time on at all, and that is exactly, you mentioned that all of these societies, not just the Ottoman Empire, but the Arab empires as well, they are multi-religious empires. So you can't really provide an explanation until you take account of that. And there's the basic question that, or the basic issue that you need to confront is that if Islamic law or certain elements of Islamic law are a problem, you have people in the empire who are certainly an integral part, a very important part of the social system and the economic system, who are not required under Islamic law to follow Islamic law. You have choice of law in the Ottoman Empire. The empire's Christians and Jews are able to follow their own laws. Only in their relations with Muslims do they have to adjudicate their cases in Islamic courts. Otherwise, they can, in dealing among themselves, they form partnership among themselves, they have disputes, they can go to a rabbinic court, they can go to police. This is something that is available. So you have to, one of the things you need to come up with an answer for is why organizational development doesn't take place. Now, the answer for this is quite complex. You have to look at the incentives they have for Islamicizing their laws, and ultimately this is what happens. And in fact, you don't have, because the Jewish law in the Ottoman Empire and the Middle East Empire in general, and Greek law and Armenian law, because these are quite Islamicized, until the late 18th century, you do not see major differences in economic performance among the minorities. True, as you say, you can find in any given city, in Kayseri or in Adana, or you pick a city, and you can find that Armenians are more dominant in one sector and Turks are more dominant in one sector, but you do not find major wealth differences. And if you look, and all of the studies that I have seen show that in the 17th century, still in the 16th century, that the Turks and these other groups are economically, in terms of economic performance, are quite similar. The differences emerge in the late 18th century and then get compounded in the 19th century, and the reason is that the minorities are not because they're inherently more commercial. It is because they start using modern organizational forms, and because they're able to do this, they are able to form alliances with Westerners. This is something that also the people around Abdul-Majid also recognize this, and they realize that you have to give the Muslims of the empire the institutions and the commercial tools to compete with not just with the foreigners, but with the minorities. But this is a very big issue. I've just been able to touch the surface. Okay.